Today, we're going to see how to collaborate with any public repo on GitHub, and in doing so, change this rather ugly looking password generator into something more visually appealing. So I created a video a couple months back about how to create a truly random password generator using the secrets module, and I also explained why it's so important to use the secrets module over the random module for this process. But in this video, instead of going into depth about how to create truly random passwords, we're going to take on the role of Paul, who wants to get into the practice of collaborating on GitHub. Now, Paul has stumbled on this password generator and recognizes that there are significant areas where it can be enhanced. Setting aside the 30-year-old user interface for a second, Paul could transform this app into a password safe that turns generated passwords into cryptographic hashes and stores them within a serverless database like SQLite. And I might create a separate video myself showing how to do this at a later date. But for now, Paul will start modernizing the user interface with custom Tkinter. And to get started, he will need to fork out the password app repo to his own account. Forking a public repo is an excellent way to contribute to open source projects. By forking a repo, you can make modifications and improvements to a code base without disrupting the original upstream project. And once you've made your changes, you can submit something called a pull request, allowing the project maintainer to review and potentially incorporate your changes. So Paul needs to make sure he's logged into his GitHub account, and then he proceeds by searching for the name of the public repo in the search field above. This leads him to the password app on Steve's Coding Labs account, and there are a number of useful bits of information here. We can see a short description of what the repo is about, as well as the last time it was committed to. After clicking on this link, Paul is led to the repo page where he can explore the files and commit history in more depth, before clicking on the fork button here. Paul decides to leave the repo's name and description the same, and to copy the main branch only. Normally this will be the best action to take, because the main branch will contain the primary project. Any branches that stem from this main branch are usually temperamental, and will contain things like bug fixes or experimental features that may never be incorporated into the main project. So after Paul clicks Create Fork, this repo's main branch, with all its commit history, will be copied over to Paul's account. Now Paul has his own personal copy of the password generator app, and any commits Paul makes will only affect his copy. I can also log into my Steve's Coding Labs account and see that my repo has been forked by one person. And by diving in a bit deeper, I can also see who that person is and what additional changes they've made to their copy of my repo. Now Paul should set up SSH keys on his GitHub account. By doing so, he can securely connect his local machine to the GitHub server without the need for password authentication. I won't explain how this is done here, but I have a video in the description showing the exact steps. From here, Paul needs to open up the forked repo and click on the code button. Since Paul has set up the SSH keys, he can click on the SSH tab and copy this address here. Opening up a terminal or git bash window, Paul types git clone and pastes the address. After hitting enter, the repo is downloaded to his laptop. Now Paul does a couple of things here. He lists the files in the current directory, which is the desktop in this case. He then enters into the password generator folder and lists the files. The git remote-v is used to check if the correct remotes are set up for the password generator repo. A git pull further verifies this, and finally he does a git log one line to show a compressed version of all the previous commits. Since Paul has VS Code installed on his laptop, he can type code followed by a period to open up the current directory, and now he can inspect the code. But before Paul makes any changes, it's best practice to create a new feature branch so he doesn't disrupt anything on the main timeline. And he can create a new branch by clicking on this branch button here and then selecting create new branch, or he can do this in the terminal with the git branch command. Now Paul has decided to name his branch UI feature, and doing a git branch -a shows it was successfully created here. Now this readout provides some important information. The star indicates Paul is currently checked out on the main branch, and these two branches are located on his local machine. Anything in red belongs to the remote server. To switch to the UI feature branch, Paul must use the git checkout command. And now when Paul opens up VS Code, you can see that any modifications now made will be added to this new branch. Before Paul starts modifying the code, he decides to set up a virtual environment for his project. So Paul has changed directory to a folder where he stores all his various Python environments and uses this command to generate a new one. Once created, he can click on the Python version in VS Code and select the Python interpreter that is linked to the newly generated virtual environment. We should see that Paul is now working in this new environment, and he can proceed to pip install custom tkinter. By opening up a terminal and typing pip list, Paul can see that his virtual environment has only 2 packages. Pip installing custom tkinter will download a few more. Okay, I'm going to speed through this bit now, but I have the full code on my GitHub page if you're interested. And this is the completed app. Going back to his terminal, Paul does a git status, which shows what files have been modified in his local repo, and git add stages those changes. And finally, a git commit will save these changes into his local repo. I do explain this process in much more detail in my Git and GitHub video, so if you find this confusing, do check that out. Doing a git log shows us that Paul's commit has been successfully added to the feature branch, and all that's left to do is to push this branch up to the forked repo with this command. Paul is going to log back into his account and open up his forked repo. At the top here, we can see that the UI feature branch has successfully been added to this remote repo, and that it now contains 2 branches. By clicking on the Compare and Pull Request button, Paul can now write to me at Steve's Coding Lab, explaining what changes is made on his feature branch, and then send everything over. As soon as Paul does this, I should get an email notification, and then I can open up my repo on my account and click on the Pull Request button at the top here. After clicking on Paul's request, I can read his message and then click on the Commits tab to see the exact code changes he's made. If I'm happy with his changes and there are no conflicts with the base branch, I can merge Paul's changes into my main branch. Paul can now log into his GitHub account, see that his work has been successfully merged, and can now delete his feature branch. Going back to his laptop, Paul can type git remote prune origin to remove any remote tracking branches, and then force delete his feature branch on his local machine. And that's all there is to it. So that's it for today's video. I hope you found it helpful, and if you want to see more videos like this, make sure you give this video a thumbs up and maybe subscribe. And other than that, take care and I'll see you soon.